What began as a cruel attempt to humiliate her turned into a moment that silenced an entire room and shattered egos. You won't believe how she flipped the script, with nothing but raw talent. It was a warm Friday evening at La Fontaine, an upscale restaurant nestled in the heart of Raleigh, North Carolina. The hum of elegant conversation floated through the air. Glasses clinked. Servers moved with grace. Jazz notes drifted from a grand piano in the corner, wrapping the space in a sense of effortless indulgence. Deborah, a 25-year-old waitress with a reserved demeanor and an unmistakable spark in her eyes, glided between tables with plates in poise. To most guests, she was just another uniformed server. But inside, Deborah carried dreams that stretched far beyond the velvet curtains of La Fontaine. Her passion wasn't in service, it was music. The piano had been her sanctuary since childhood. A place to pour every emotion, every thought too big for words. But dreams didn't pay rent. Working long shifts at La Fontaine was survival. A stepping stone toward the music academy she quietly longed for. Only a few people knew her secret. Some of the restaurant staff had heard her, once or twice, stealing time on the upright piano tucked in the back room during her break. They whispered about it with admiration. That night, just as the dinner rush settled into its rhythm, the front door opened, and in walked Leonard Grayson. Everyone noticed. The wealthy entrepreneur arrived with an entourage, his presence sharp and smug. His reputation for arrogance preceded him. Known for flashy displays and a venomous wit, Leonard had a way of turning any room into his stage. Deborah's co-workers traded looks. Leonard wasn't easy. He never tipped well, always flirted inappropriately, and loved making staff squirm. Deborah had never served him before, but that would change tonight. As Leonard scanned the room, his eyes landed on her. A pause. A smirk. Deborah felt the weight of his gaze but kept moving, focused on the rhythm of her work. Glasses. Menus. Refills. But Leonard wasn't finished. He'd chosen her. And not for her service. Deborah grew up in a small town in South Carolina, where dreams like hers often felt too big to speak aloud. Her mother, a single parent, worked double shifts as a nurse to keep food on the table. Their home was small, their means modest, but music lived in every corner. A neighbor's old, out-of-tune piano became Deborah's world. She taught herself to play by mimicking radio songs and later challenged herself with classical scores from second-hand books. She played in church, at school, at local festivals. But passion couldn't pay college tuition. Despite her talent, scholarships didn't come. She set her dreams aside to support her family, trading concert halls for customer checks. But the music never left her. It waited. When Deborah moved to Raleigh, La Fontaine offered two things: good pay and a grand piano. She rarely had time to touch it. But knowing it was there kept her hope alive. That night, Leonard and his guests settled into their seats. Deborah approached, balancing a tray with ease. Leonard ordered top-shelf scotch, cracking jokes loud enough for tables nearby to hear. Deborah smiled politely, took their orders, and walked away, ignoring the way his gaze clung to her. "Deborah," he said, catching sight of her name tag. "That's a name with mystery. Bet you've got some hidden talents." Caught off guard, she nodded politely and stepped away. She didn't see the grin Leonard flashed his friends. Or the way he was plotting. To her, he was just another difficult customer. To him, she was going to be the night's entertainment. The evening wore on. Deborah kept her pace, her professionalism shielding her discomfort. Leonard's voice cut through the air as he bragged loudly about business conquests and mocked people who don't aim high. His entourage laughed on cue. Other guests exchanged annoyed looks. Deborah did her best to stay focused, but each trip past his table left her more tense. Something about Leonard felt different. Not just unpleasant, predatory. As she served wine, Leonard struck. "Tell me, Deborah," he said, raising his voice. "What do you do when you're not serving steaks and salads? Surely someone like you has a dream." She froze. Then answered softly, "I play piano." "A little." Leonard's eyes lit up. He smiled, and it wasn't kind. "A pianist? Now that's fascinating." He turned to the room. "Well then, I think we're overdue for some live music, don't you?" He looked toward the corner. Toward the grand piano. And in a voice that dared her to say no, he added, "Why don't you give us a little performance?" "A little performance?" Deborah froze. The room seemed to hush itself, the weight of Leonard's challenge hanging in the air. "Oh, I couldn't," she said quickly, forcing a nervous laugh. "I'm just here to work tonight." But Leonard wasn't letting it go. "Nonsense," he declared, loud enough to turn heads. "There's a piano right there in the corner. Show us what you've got. Surely a future star like you isn't afraid of a little audience." His companions chuckled, clearly enjoying the show. Other diners turned to look, curiosity flickering on their faces. Deborah's chest tightened. She felt their eyes on her, the heat of silent judgment pressing in. She wanted to say no, to disappear. But Leonard's voice was a dare, hanging in the air like bait. "I really shouldn't," she tried again, scanning the room for a lifeline. Her coworkers looked away, unsure how to help. Leonard leaned back in his chair and took a sip of scotch, smirking. "Ah, I see," he said mockingly. "All talk, no talent. That's disappointing." His words hit like a slap. Deborah's hands clenched. She didn't seek confrontation. But the way he dismissed her, as if she were small, forgettable, cut deeper than she expected. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, "Never let anyone make you small, Deborah. You're bigger than they'll ever know." The room stood still. She looked at the piano. Then back at Leonard. And in a voice calm but steady, she said, "Fine. I'll play." A ripple moved through the dining room as Deborah stepped toward the piano. Her fear walked beside her, but so did something else, defiance. The soft glow of the chandelier turned the grand piano into a spotlight, its black lacquered finish gleaming beneath her trembling hands. Leonard leaned back, satisfied. But he had no idea what was coming. Deborah sat down. She took a breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys, hesitant, uncertain. This wasn't a church recital. It wasn't a community center. This was a room full of power, money, and eyes sharpened by arrogance. She closed her eyes and began to play. She chose a piece she knew by heart, Claude Debussy's Clair de Lune. The opening notes fell into the room like a whisper, gentle and hesitant. A cough broke the silence in the back, and someone shifted in their chair. Deborah didn't waver. Her focus narrowed. The music took shape. As her fingers moved, so did the room. Something in the air changed. The melody curled around the chandeliers, softened the crisp linen tablecloths, and slipped beneath the silk and arrogance. The notes poured from her like a story only she could tell, of nights practicing on a broken piano, of sacrifice, of quiet hopes carried like prayer. People stopped talking. Even Leonard. Deborah didn't look up. She didn't need to. The shift was palpable. The mockery that once clung to the air had dissolved. What remained was reverence. She let go of hesitation. The music swelled. Her hands danced with purpose, painting sound into the walls. For the first time in years, she wasn't just playing. She was being. By the time the final note hovered and faded, the silence was sacred. Deborah sat still, her hands resting on the keys. Then, a thunderous applause. It erupted like thunder, bouncing off marble and glass, swelling with unexpected joy. Diners stood. Some clapped so hard it echoed. Her coworkers cheered. Their pride undeniable. Even Leonard clapped, though slow, hesitant. His smirk was gone, replaced by something unreadable, surprise, discomfort, maybe even regret. But his reluctant applause couldn't tarnish what Deborah had reclaimed. Her voice. She stood, her knees trembling but her back straight. As she looked out over the room, she didn't see judgment anymore. She saw witnesses. Faces full of something new, admiration, respect, awe. She gave a soft nod to the table that had clapped the loudest, lips curling into a small, quiet smile. She didn't feel proud. She felt free. Then, as if drawn by gravity, her eyes met Leonard's. He was seated still, hands now folded. His confidence from earlier had cracked. The brazen certainty now a thin veil over confusion. "Well," he said finally, louder than necessary, slicing through the hush. "That was unexpected." A weak chuckle followed. "I suppose talent really does come from the most surprising places." The line landed with a dull thud. His companions shifted uncomfortably. Deborah tilted her head slightly, studying him. He meant it as an olive branch. But it rang hollow, too late, too forced. "Thank you," she said, her tone calm and deliberate. There was no warmth. But no hostility either. She wasn't letting him pull her back into smallness. Her music had already spoken louder than anything he could say. Leonard cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable under the collective weight of the room's stare. He motioned for another drink, a flimsy attempt at salvaging control. "You've got quite a gift," he muttered, almost grudgingly. Deborah gave a single nod, her gaze unflinching. "Everyone has a gift," she said, her tone measured. "It's how you choose to use it that matters." The room tensed again. Her words weren't loud, but they stung. And that sting rippled quietly across linen-covered tables and half-eaten plates. Leonard shifted in his seat. The dominance he so casually wielded was dissolving, stripped away moment by moment. Diners began turning back to their meals, but the room had changed. The atmosphere no longer buzzed with the low hum of wealth and vanity. Something softer, deeper had replaced it, an unspoken reverence. Respect. Deborah stepped away from the piano, the adrenaline still burning in her chest. Her coworkers greeted her with subtle nods, their eyes reflecting a mix of pride and awe. She still had a job to do, tables to clear, drinks to refill, but something inside her had changed. Her posture. Her pace. Her presence. She moved with intent now. With certainty. Leonard's table had gone quiet. His entourage, once eager to laugh at his every joke, now avoided her eyes. Their corner of the restaurant had lost its shine. All that remained was silence. As Deborah walked from table to table, patrons stopped her, not out of obligation, but admiration. "You're incredible," one older woman whispered as Deborah set down a coffee cup. "I don't think I've ever heard anything so moving," another man added. "Keep going. You've got something special," someone said. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Each word chipped away at the doubts that had haunted her for years. These weren't compliments. They were confirmation. She thanked each person quietly, her smile small but full. Her heart was swelling. Then she approached Leonard's table again, with the check. He looked up, his expression guarded, a mix of bruised ego and something he couldn't quite name. "You've made your point," he said, stiffly. "No need to rub it in." Deborah paused. Her eyes met his. "It was never about proving anything to you," she replied, calm and unwavering. "I just wanted to play." Leonard had no comeback. He stared at his drink, fingers tightening around the glass. The man who'd walked in radiating power now sat in silence, overshadowed by a woman with nothing but truth on her side. As he signed the bill, one of his companions, much younger, less hardened, looked at Deborah. "You were amazing," he said, quietly. Genuinely. His voice surprised her. Not just the tone, but the sincerity. For a moment, she saw past the table's arrogance, and caught a flicker of something real. "Thank you," she said with a soft smile, then turned and walked away. Leonard and his guests left without ceremony. No grand goodbyes. No final jabs. Just quiet, awkward exit. Deborah didn't watch them go with satisfaction. She didn't need to. Because in her heart, the night wasn't about Leonard. It was about freedom. The tips she made that night were unusually generous, enough to cover her rent and leave a little extra. Enough to finally schedule the piano lessons she'd kept pushing off. Later, walking home under crisp night air, Deborah breathed deeply. She wasn't just surviving. She wasn't just dreaming. She was becoming. Back in her apartment, she sat at her old upright piano. The keys were worn, the tone uneven. But none of that mattered. Her fingers danced. The music didn't come from perfection. It came from her. Something had shifted within her that night, not just triumph, but clarity. Her gift wasn't something to hide or explain. It simply was. And it was enough. In the days that followed, the story spread. Diners shared the tale. Locals passed it on. Some called it a moment of grace. Others, justice. A few days later, Deborah's phone rang. The voice on the other end belonged to a man who had dined at La Fontaine that night. A music producer. He wasn't offering instant fame. Just a chance. A studio. A demo. A door. And this time, Deborah didn't hesitate. She said yes. Not because she thought it would change everything overnight, but because she was ready to walk through it. For years, fear had whispered that she wasn't enough. That her dream was too far. Too impractical. Too naive. But now she knew better. Resilience. Grace. Truth. That was her power. Leonard Grayson hadn't just underestimated her, he had symbolized every voice that tried to shrink her. And she silenced him not with rage, not with pride, but with the piano. To anyone who heard her story, her message was clear. Don't let someone else define your worth. Because the world is full of Leonards, people who feed on doubt, who project their own fears onto others to feel important. But true power? It comes from knowing who you are. It comes from letting your passion speak louder than their ridicule. As Deborah gently closed the piano lid and rested her hands on the faded wood, she smiled. Her journey was far from over. But now it had truly begun. And what about you? What dream have you been hiding, afraid to chase? Don't wait for someone like Leonard to test you. Take your first step. Right now. And if Deborah's story moved you, subscribe for more stories of resilience, purpose, and unexpected victory. Your story could be next.